takes it in overtime. Brady can chop, breakaway shoots, scores!
Welcome to Sens Talk. My name is Brandon and I am your host. Today is the first part of a multi-part series where I take a look at the key positions of your Ottawa Senators and review how they did this past season. So today we're going to take a look at goaltending, but next week, be on the lookout, we're going to take a look at each defenseman and how they did this past season. Now, speaking of Ottawa and their goaltenders, Ottawa had 7 different starters this season. Unbelievable. I mean, actually insane when you think about it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Unbelievable to have 7 different starters for your Ottawa Senators. So there's a lot of names to go through, so I'm going to get to it quickly. But I just want to mention rather briefly the overall team goalie stats this year for the Ottawa Senators. So overall, between the 7 different goaltenders, Ottawa had a combined 900 save percentage and 3.13 goals against average. Both, by the way, are below league average. Goals saved above average as well was minus 11.1. Yeah, minus 11.1. Just for reference, a positive number means the goalie is stopping more goals than the average goalie would in the National Hockey League. So, needless to say, negative 11.1, not so good. Now, before we get into the players such as Cam Talbot, Anton Forsberg, and whatever, I just want to mention this rather quickly. It's clear that the inconsistency in net for Ottawa absolutely cost them some games, of course, but as well made it difficult for Ottawa to find any traction this season. So with that, let's get to the goaltender that played the most games with Ottawa this year, Cam Talbot. So as I just mentioned, Cam Talbot suited up for the most games in the crease for the Ottawa Senators this season, playing 36 games with a 17-14-2 record during that span. Here's a bit of a yikes. 898 save percentage, but here's a positive. Actually, an above league average goals against average at 2.93 GAA, and as well a negative 5.5 goals saved above average with as well 1 shutout during that span. Now, Cam Talbot's a player that I was very excited to watch going into last season. There's no doubt about it. And this is going to sound crazy, really crazy when you think about it. But I was more excited to watch Cam Talbot play for your Ottawa Senators. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. And probably this is so embarrassing to say. I was more excited to watch Cam Talbot this season. My goodness, this is so stupid. Than Claude Giroux and Alex DeBrincat. Now, I know that sounds crazy now, but hear me out. Okay, hear me out. Cam Talbot was Ottawa's first legitimate NHL starter since Craig Anderson, okay? That's over half a decade at that point, last season. Cam Talbot, going into last year, came off of an all-star season with Minnesota, putting them into the playoffs, and he has a strong resume of bringing teams to the playoffs. We all expected playoffs last season, or at least a playoff push, and I thought Cam Talbot would be a major reason for that. Once again, an all-star with Minnesota, put up great numbers, a lot of wins. Now that we look at it, maybe, the defensive structure in Minnesota might have played a factor into that. But even regardless of that, Talbot had a strong resume throughout his entire NHL career. And for some reason, it just didn't work out in Ottawa. I don't know what it was. It just did not work out in Ottawa. 898 save percentage. Yikes. 2.93 goals against average is pretty good. But once again, look, yeah, maybe he wasn't allowing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 goals a game, but it means he was allowing a lot of goals on not a lot of shots. So that's not really great. So once again, I was really excited to watch Cam Talbot this year, but for some reason, it just did not work out. Now, there was, of course, that injury that halted him for the first month of October that obviously delays things and affects things. There's no doubt about that. I would be neglecting, the true picture here if I didn't mention that. But once again, he's a veteran. He's played a lot in the National Hockey League, so I am surprised he cannot bounce back. It's not like he's 38, 39, 40. He still has a few years left in the tank as well. So overall, just a very disappointing year for the netminder that was supposed to stabilize this crease. And we desperately need stabilization in the crease in Ottawa, which we'll talk about later. But between the injuries and inconsistent play in the second half, it's probably best for both sides to move on at this point. I do wish Cam Talbot nothing but the best moving forward. It really does suck it didn't work out, especially looking at who we gave up for Cam Talbot. But at the end of the day, sometimes that happens, and, I'll talk about this with Søgaard and Leevi Merilainen later on in this video, but that shows truly why we cannot give up those guys. Just like Bishop and Leonard, we cannot trade them. We have to keep them because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Keep your prospects and let them flourish in the AHL and potentially in the NHL. But we'll talk about that later on in the video. I just wanted to mention that because once again, Cam Talbot was supposed to be the stabilization for at least the next couple of years. A stopgap option until Leevi Merilainen or Søgaard or whoever else was ready. So it does suck that it, did not work out. But once again, I wish him nothing but the best. But definitely a disappointing year for Cam Talbot. Now let's take a look at Anton Forsberg, who had the complete opposite of a disappointing year. He actually had a pretty good one. Let's take a look. So Anton Forsberg this year played in 28 games with an 11-11-2 record during that span, with a .902 save percentage and a 3.26 goals against average with a negative 1.8 goals saved above average. That is by far the best number at that stat on the Ottawa Senators, as well with 2 shutouts. Now, by the way, look at that picture. Look at that beard. Looks like my boy Anton Forsberg needs some Owl & Co. grooming to, spruce up that beard, make it smell good. By the way, go to owlandcogrooming.com if you want to follow suit like myself, maybe Anton Forsberg as well. Use the promo code SensTalk15. You'll save 15% off your first order. Highly, highly recommend it. Miss Sens Talk loves this, Owl & Co. grooming stuff. It's unbelievable how good it makes you smell. Maybe Anton Forsberg's a fan. If I had a beard, I'd definitely be using some beard oil as well. But yeah, owlandcogrooming.com. Highly recommend it. Check it out. But anyways, let's get back into the hockey. Look, Anton Forsberg was easily Ottawa's best and most consistent goaltender last year prior to him tearing both MCLs in February, which was just terrible. It was against Edmonton Oilers. I mean, he had to get stretchered off. It was just a terrible scene. But look, he will absolutely be back next year in Ottawa, and he will likely be a 1A, 1B option. He'll either be the starter as a 1A or the backup that gets a lot of starts as the 1B. It kind of depends on what happens with Matt Søgaard, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and as well, whether or not Ottawa brings in another goaltender through free agency or, via trade or whatever. But besides all that, overall, I would say this is absolutely a decent year for Anton Forsberg. There's no doubt about it. But it's really tough to analyze his season because he didn't even suit up for 1/3 of Ottawa's games. So because of that, it really is tough to take a good look at his season. But when he was in the crease for Ottawa, he was consistently a top 20 goaltender in the league. Take a look at your screen right now. Money Puck, and you're seeing these pictures, shows the stats for themselves. He was top 20 around goaltenders that are playing NHL playoff hockey right now, guys. So this guy, when healthy, was a top 20 goaltender in the National Hockey League, was absolutely starting material. So it really is a shame that the MCL injuries happened because, once again, he was amidst a great year again for Ottawa. And don't let the save percentage and goals against average fool you. The advanced stats truly show that Anton Forsberg had a great year, and if the defense was just a little bit better in front of him, that save percentage is probably up by 0.6. The goals against average is probably down as well. So, it kind of sucks that a bad defense in front of him kind of derailed his stats, but if you look at the advanced stats, Anton Forsberg is consistently a top 20 starter in the National Hockey League. And on top of that, like you just saw on your screen, the advanced stats truly show, in my opinion, how he stole some games for us early in the year, especially when things were rough early on, especially, in that rough start there in November. He stole some games for us, especially when we weren't playing well, and that alone really shows the strength of Anton Forsberg. He's a guy that you can rely on. I don't know as a starter, but you could definitely rely on him for 30-35 games as a 1B, 1A option. Now, like I just mentioned, many have been concerned about the effect the MCL injuries might have on him next year. As someone who's torn their MCL, I tore my left MCL, I can tell you this is the preferred tear over, an ACL tear or a UCL tear. But I'm not a doctor, but it doesn't take a doctor to realize that the wear and tear on the knees for an NHL attendee is rough. There's no doubt about it. It's rough. For defenseman Bobby Orr, for example, his career ended abruptly and rather short, to be honest with you, because of knee injuries. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of healthy knees in the National Hockey League. So there definitely is a bit of a concern there. So once again, with the wear and tear, that definitely is going to come on Forsberg's knees now because of the 2 MCL injuries. It's key to note he didn't get surgery. Naturally, rehab, which is definitely better in terms of long-term, flexibility and strength in the muscle. But regardless of that, he's going to have to go up and down quite a bit. It's going to be tough on his knees. He's 30 years old. He's not getting any younger. So because of that, he's a solid rotation goalie for us next year, as he has been since being brought here from Winnipeg, but he cannot be relied upon as a starter, in my opinion. Pierre Dorion has already mentioned, he's looking for a third goaltender, whether that's through trade or free agency or whatever. And I think that makes sense to find a way to solidify this crease here in Ottawa. And I think that really is the wise move. I do think that Forsberg is a fixture here in Ottawa next year, maybe even the year after that. But I do have concerns on Anton Forsberg and his long-term longevity because of the knee injuries. Now, once again, I think he's going to be fine next year and even the year after that. But I do have concerns about relying on him heavily. You just can't rely on him as the sole starter starting 40-50 games. His history just shows he can't handle it. So I love Forsy, but we definitely need to bring some solidification into the crease. Now, speaking of that, let's take a look at one of the goaltenders of the future here in Ottawa, Matt Søgaard. Matt Søgaard last year with Ottawa, in his first real stint in the National Hockey League, played in 19 games, and between that span had an 8-6-3 record with an .889 save percentage and a 3.32 goals against average with a negative 7.8 goals saved above average as well. Now look, Friend of the show, Matt Søgaard, is 22 years old and by far the future of the crease for the Ottawa Senators. I want to say that now because, look, the numbers are a tad rough. They are. I'm not going to lie. I can't be biased. The numbers are rough. But remember, this was his first real NHL season, and inconsistent play is part of the learning curve for young goaltenders. Plus, it's not like the Sens defense in front of him made it any easier for him to stop the puck as well. So while I do have concerns about his glove hand and 5-hole, there's a lot of goals that beat him 5-hole and glove hand. And look, for a goaltender that's 6'6", 6'7", just can't be giving up goals on that type of angle. You have to find a way to stop those. But once again, look, I feel both can be easily addressed this summer, literally right now, with some off-season conditioning and as well with the NHL experience he gained this past season. Once again, he's 22. He's barely older than me, guys. I mean, I don't know how I would handle the National Hockey League at this age, okay? So it's not easy for a prospect, especially just being thrown in there in a bad situation because Forsberg and Talbot were not healthy for a lot of the season. So it was a tough spot for him to be thrust in no matter what, but I think there were definitely some bright spots from Matt Søgaard this season, regardless of what the numbers show. It's not a slam dunk, but I would expect Matt Søgaard to be back with Ottawa next year as a mainstay in the tandem, likely splitting 1A, 1B situation there with Anton Forsberg and potentially another goaltender brought in via trade or free agency. But as well, getting more time in the AHL certainly would not hurt him, and that possibility definitely exists. So overall, I would say I'm tremendously excited for Matt Søgaard. His potential is absolutely through the roof, and despite some rough moments this year, his size and athleticism gives this kid the tools to be a good NHL starter. So once again, look, yeah, some rough numbers, but he's 22. He needs to hit that learning curve. He has a good offseason here to get some conditioning in. And once again, with the crowded crease down there in Belleville, which we'll talk about in a couple of seconds here, I really expect him to be up with the big club here in Ottawa with the Ottawa Senators in the crease a good amount of the time. Maybe 30 games he gets. I don't know. We shall see. Kind of depends what they do in the offseason with a trade or a free agency acquisition at the goaltender position. But once again, Søgaard will not be benched. He will be getting minutes, whether it's here in Ottawa or down in the AHL with the Belleville Senators. So yeah, look, the numbers overall are a bit rough for Matt Søgaard, but overall, he's a young goaltender. Goaltenders take a good amount of time to develop. And the fact that there were some games this year where he absolutely stole for the Ottawa Senators gives me a good amount of hope that he's going to be able to figure it out and round to form what he showed there in the WHL and what he showed down there in Belleville as well, that he could take that next step. So next year's a big year for Matt Søgaard, and I'm excited to see how he does because once again, this guy's easy to cheer for, a really good guy, and I think he has a bright future. So really excited to see what Matt Søgaard does next year. Should get some good conditioning in this offseason. Now let's take a look at Kevin Mandolese, a surprising goaltender that emerged onto the NHL scene this season. Kevin Mandolese last year surprisingly played in 3 games for Ottawa, going 1-2-0 during that span with a .916 save percentage, very, very good number there, and a 3.29 goals against average. At 22 years old, Mando has sort of been lost in the shuffle of Sens goalie prospects with the rise of Matt Søgaard and Leevi Merilainen. But we cannot forget about this kid, as he was literally named the QMJHL Goalie of the Year less than 5 years ago. He's got some potential as well. There's no doubt about it. We saw that in the historic 46-save win against the New York Islanders, and as well with a strong performance against the Boston Bruins, the best regular season, not playoff, regular season team there in Boston with the Boston Bruins. He had a great performance there as well. Gave Ottawa a very good chance to upset Boston for like the 3rd time in the season at that point. But, 46 saves against the Islanders is the second most, I believe, in NHL history for an NHL debut for a goaltender. So right off the bat, just historic numbers and historic, pedigree there for Kevin Mandolese technically. But he's also been dominating in the ECHL with the Allen Americans during their current Kelly Cup run. And they're currently in the second round, and Mandolese has like a .925, .930 save percentage. It's unbelievable what he's been doing down there in the ECHL in Texas. But anyways, on that note, Mandolese, in my opinion, is a guy that we might see next year. It's a stopgap option, to back up one of the NHL guys if, let's say, Forsberg is hurt or sick or Søgaard is out with an illness or whatever it is. He can absolutely be that guy that's called up, to back up or even get a spot start. He's absolutely earned another look in the National Hockey League, in my opinion, and he will likely split duties down in Belleville with the next guy I'm about to discuss. But regardless, not many expected much from Mando this season, and he's exceeded all expectations and has forced himself back into the conversation, which, in my opinion, is great to see. This season has been an absolute home run for Kevin Mandolese, and I think next year getting more minutes down in the AHL will give him a better opportunity to show his stuff to the NHL scouts here in Ottawa. Now besides that, let's discuss his, tandem mate, Leevi Merilainen. Leevi Merilainen last year suited up in 2 games for Ottawa, going 0-1-1 during that span with an .878 save percentage and a 4.28 goals against average. Now, let me tell you right now that those numbers are tilted due to a tough game in Florida. He allowed 3 goals on 12 shots, but the night prior, he made 37 saves in a 2-1 loss in overtime to the Carolina Hurricanes. So, the numbers look bad, but they're really not. It's just because he didn't really get much time in the National Hockey League. So, at 20 years old, younger than me, Leevi Merilainen showed a glimpse of what's to come during his taste of the NHL a couple months ago. His athleticism and ability to read the play is elite. I really noticed this during his couple of games in the National Hockey League and through highlights and time watching him in the World Juniors and with Kingston. He really uses the paddle really, really well. He's in the crease, right? He's down in position, and he often bats the puck out of the way, whether it's somebody coming in or a cross, crease pass. He uses his paddle very often. His paddle is very active, and I think that's a rare thing we see in the National Hockey League these days. I wish there was more poke checks. Leevi Merilainen is the type of guy that, do the poke check, and I think that's a big part of his game as well. He's really good at reading the play, and as we saw often, especially against Carolina this year, that yellow glove was used quite a bit. He has a great glove hand. And once again, by the way, in Belleville, he played 4 games in Belleville after getting those couple games in Ottawa. During that short AHL stint, after the short NHL stint, he put up a .933 save percentage in 4 games, getting 3 wins. Unbelievable. Leevi Merilainen completely turned around the Belleville Senators in the last couple of weeks and gave them a narrow but possible shot at the playoffs. So, Leevi Merilainen will be the Belleville Senators starter next year. There's really no doubt about it. He's definitely the future potentially in the net for the Ottawa Senators is going to be between him and Matt Søgaard. There's really no doubt about that in my opinion. So with Leevi having a full season to continue his development down in Belleville, and remember, goaltenders take much longer to develop, he will be able to get a good bulk of the starts in the AHL. And while I don't expect us to see him in the NHL next year, unless something crazy happens like this year, I would expect to see him back with the big club within the next 3 years. Give him a couple of years in the AHL, let him marinate, let him develop, let him dominate, and then call him up. So the future is really bright for the Yellow Glove, Leevi Merilainen. So excited to see this guy play next year in Belleville. Probably will have to go watch him play live, but really excited for this kid. Now let's take a look at the next guy on the list, Dylan Ferguson. So Dylan Ferguson this year for Ottawa played in 2 games, going 1-1-0 during that span with a .940 save percentage and a 2.52 goals against average. What a story this guy was. At 24 years old, he sniffed NHL hockey only once during the Vegas expansion season, and he only played a few minutes at that. So basically, never got an NHL opportunity up until the season. And boy, oh boy, did he get an opportunity. Before joining the Ottawa Center organization, he's with the Toronto Marlies. He got lost in the shuffle there in Toronto and was shipped off to Belleville due to the absurd amount of goalie injuries they had as well. Remember, Ottawa, 7 different starters. Insane. Belleville had like 12 or 13 different starters. I mean, just on another level down there in the AHL. It was absolutely insane. I'm surprised they didn't have to get the Zamboni guy starting in the crease for them. It was unbelievable what was happening down there in the AHL. But he wound up, helping Belleville push for a playoff spot, winning some important games down the stretch, and then was called up to Ottawa. And due to injuries, he got an opportunity and effectively ended the Pittsburgh Penguins season with a remarkable 2-1 victory over the Pittsburgh Penguins, where he made 48 saves. Unbelievable stuff there from Dylan Ferguson. Just like Kevin Mandolese. I mean, what is going on with all these, I don't want to say random goaltenders, but these lesser known goaltenders absolutely stealing the show here in Ottawa? I mean, there's something in the water, I guess. But regardless of what's in the water here in Ottawa, and by the way, we all know the water's freezing cold at the Canadian Tire Center. Maybe that's what it is, but it was unbelievable watching Dylan Ferguson this year. And, while he is a free agent next season, it wouldn't shock me if the Sens brought him back as a depth option for the AHL as their third goaltender. But we shall see. Who knows if he even wants to do that, to be honest with you. He probably wants a better role to get another NHL opportunity. It could be worth a look as a third option down there, but like I just said, we'll see what happens. It's really up to Dylan Ferguson. I really don't think there's any issue with Ryan Bowness and the Belleville Senators bringing him back. It's up to Ferguson to decide whether or not this is a good fit for him. And besides that, by the way, shout out to Fergalicious. If that's the last time I get to say that. I mean, it was just a great little story there at the end of the year. Now, speaking of great stories, let's get to Hellberg, Magnus Hellberg. Now, the last guy on the list, some people are going to wonder why I even bothered covering. Well, look, he started a game for Ottawa and got a win. That deserves a bit of recognition. So Magnus Hellberg played 1 game early in the season, I think it was in October, against the Dallas Stars, a 4-2 victory, making 29 stops. I mean, Magnus Hellberg is a cool guy. Kind of sucks we couldn't keep him around long-term as a third goaltender, especially with some of the injuries we faced throughout the season, but it was a fun story while it lasted. Seems like a cool dude. We made a cool video as well with Pavel Lubanski on Twitter, with Magnus Hellberg. I'll put it on the screen here. That was a fun one. But look, he was later claimed off waivers with Detroit and stayed with Detroit for the rest of the season, so good for him. He got to stay in the National Hockey League. I'm glad it worked out for him. But that's kind of it, and guess what? That's the end of the video. Woo! We're done. 20 plus minutes of Sens content is over. So thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Who is your favorite goaltender and who is your least favorite goaltender this season? Now besides that, thank you all for watching. I'll see you very, very soon. Go Sens, go.